Good morning, everyone. Thank you for making it all the way down to this end of the hallway. I know it was probably a long journey down here, and thank you for coming. Today, we're going to talk about developing apps for SharePoint 2013 with Visual Studio 2012. Tried to make the title as long as I could. So first, I was kind of wanting to understand a little bit about my audience and what you guys have seen. So I was curious, how many of you guys went to the 0 to 60 talk that was given yesterday? Okay, a few. All right. How many of you would consider yourselves to be SharePoint developers of any form? All right, we got a lot of SharePoint folks. And how many would you consider yourselves pure web developers and you're kind of interested in learning more about SharePoint? All right, good. So I hope this talk will actually cater towards both worlds. So there's going to be things in it coming from the perspective of I'm a web developer trying to learn about SharePoint, and there's a lot of things in there of, hey, I know a lot about SharePoint. How do I make it work with this new app model? And so I hope you will get a lot out of this talk. So for our agenda, if you went through the 0 to 60 talk, the first section on the new app model may be a little bit of a review. I kind of look at it as where I'm trying to get you guys from 0 to 120. So the first part may be a little bit quick, but I like to make sure that everybody has kind of a good foundation to go through this with. Then we're just going to pop pretty much straight into Visual Studio and show you how to go and build your first app. Then we'll do a tour through all of the different SharePoint app artifacts that we support inside of Visual Studio for you guys to go and create. Then we will go and expand upon the new cloud app model and how the considerations of our cloud apps will affect how you do development, how you structure your code, and how you structure your builds. And then at the end, we'll show you actually how to do team collaboration through continuous integration with the Team Foundation service. So we got a pretty packed agenda, so I'm going to dive into it. So as part of reviewing the app model, there are three main types of SharePoint apps that you guys can go and create. The first one, and the one that I think is part of every app for SharePoint, is the full page app. And you can see here an example of one that I took off the Office store from AdLib PDF Publisher. And what they've done is they've created a solution that integrates the ability to take documents and publish them as PDFs into your SharePoint site. This look and feel of this page is completely up to the web developer to go and create. And you can see how this company has really done a good custom branding to really show off their brand and their capabilities. The other things you see about these full page apps is that it's actually got a banner at the top that makes it feel like it's connected back to SharePoint. It's got and that's a Chrome control that's actually coming from SharePoint itself. It also has access to documents that are hosted within SharePoint. And so it has that good connectivity back to what's actually hosted in SharePoint itself. And so this is a very common app pattern and one that we have a good story for building with our tools. For you classic SharePoint developers, the concept of an app part is very similar to that of a client web part. In fact, the API names are the same, and we call them that in our tools. With new SharePoint 2013, we have this concept of an app part, which really allows you to take external content and host it in an iframe. From a end user perspective, I really like to think of these as like the tiles that you have in Windows 8 or Windows Phone 8, where you can actually create a little bit of a window into your app that has some live content on it. So in this example of the weather app, it's showing through today's weather that somebody has customized on their portal page. You could have it be an announcements ticker or providing other sorts of business announcements. We provide good support for creating these in Visual Studio, and I'll show you how to do that in a few minutes. So I already clicked through that. The other set of type of apps for SharePoint, or the type of shapes that you can create for them, is those that have an entry point via UI command. So if you've used SharePoint a lot, you'll know that it's got a ribbon where you can have commands be activated on that. And if you have interacted with some of the items in the document libraries or on any list, you'll see that there are menu items that are available there. With the apps for SharePoint model, you can actually go and add your own custom things to the ribbon or to those item menus. And for those who've done a lot of classic SharePoint development, you'll know that this is called the Edit Control Block, or ECB. You don't really need to know all that terminology, but it's kind of, it helps map those concepts for those who know them. So, got that. So now I'm going to give you guys a little bit of an overview of how the new app model works. Now, you should keep in mind that this is really designed for web developers to make SharePoint more approachable for them. And so the key differences that I'm going to call out are really those that are different from web development. If you keep this picture in mind as you're doing development for SharePoint, you'll be able to guess a lot of how things are working. And so this is kind of the picture that I like to have in my mind as I approach it. A new app for SharePoint is essentially a web page that's built on HTML, CSS, JavaScript. It could be an ASP.NET website. We don't necessarily require that. It could be PHP. It could be Python. It could be Ruby on Rails. It could be whatever you want. But in all essence, it really is a separate website. And then you tell SharePoint about that website by using an XML file we call the app manifest. And that manifest describes your app to SharePoint and says, these are the kinds of permissions that I need, these are the kinds of things that I need access to, these are the kinds of things that I want to provide and surface up in my SharePoint site. And so if you keep this in mind as you're doing SharePoint development, you'll see that we've kind of replicated these concepts throughout our development tools. So I talked about, in the last slide, about how it's a web page or a website that you're working with. The next thing you need to think about when you're developing an app for SharePoint is really, where are you going to host that website? SharePoint provides one model that we call SharePoint hosted. And what that allows you to do is it allows you to actually host that content on SharePoint itself. Sounds very similar to the way you've done farm solutions and the way you've done sandbox solutions in the past. But the key difference with the SharePoint hosted model versus the models that you've used in the past is you can no longer store server code on SharePoint itself. You can no longer have it executing and running on SharePoint itself. If you're following the SharePoint hosted model, the only things that you can host on it are HTML, JavaScript, CSS, and other declarative artifacts that you can use in SharePoint. So for example, workflows, BCS models, lists, those sorts of things. So this actually is a really good thing for SharePoint admins, because now custom code doesn't have the ability to take down their SharePoint site. But we also recognize that in some cases, you're really going to need server code for a lot of applications. And so that's why the SharePoint team has also provided you guys with two additional models for hosting your code. In these models, the real difference is, do you have server code? And if you have server code, where do you want it hosted? If you want to let SharePoint go and create an IIS website for you in Windows Azure Websites, then the auto-hosted model is the one to go with. If you, however, you want to go and manage that website directly for yourself, you want to take on the overhead of having one web server servicing all of your SharePoint sites, then you can follow the provider-hosted model. In both of these cases, these IIS websites that are hosting your web content have the ability to connect back to SharePoint and connect back to the two webs that we talked about, the two webs, the host web as well as the app web. Now, the one thing I wanted to call out about these two webs is the SharePoint app web is actually the site that gets created when you install your SharePoint app, and that's where your app code gets hosted. It's actually an isolated SharePoint site that you have full control over as an app developer. It's when you need to get permissions when you need to get access to the host web, the host SharePoint site, that's when you actually have to go and request those permissions. And you'll see a little bit more about that later in the talk. All right, so that was a brief overview of the app model. And now I'm going to go and dive into the Visual Studio tools and the support that we provide. First and foremost, I'll tell you that this support is integrated into Visual Studio 2012, but it's not integrated out of the box. Visual Studio 2012 shipped well before SharePoint 2013 did, and so we actually have an out-of-band called the Microsoft Office Developer Tools that you can use this link to go and download and install on top of your Visual Studio 2012. If you can't remember this URL, just go to dev.office.com, which is where, and I'll have slides at the end that also that point to that. But when you install these tools, it updates your Visual Studio so that it knows how to go and target SharePoint 2013. And one of the things that's really powerful about these tools is it actually provides update for targeting more flexible environments. Back in SharePoint 2010, as a lot of you guys know, you had to install Visual Studio on the same box as SharePoint in order to go and do your development. I'm here to say, if you're doing app development, you no longer need to do that. I don't know how many times I had to set up that machine with SharePoint and Visual Studio and all the configuration. The amount of pain that we've eliminated is like just great for us even. So I know that you guys are gonna love this. That said, if you are doing SharePoint solution development, you still do have to install Visual Studio on the same machine. But for app development, we've really made that a whole lot better. The other thing we allow you to do is we allow you to target not just a SharePoint server elsewhere in your corporation. We actually allow you to target developing against Office 365. So you can have a SharePoint site up and running in about 10 or 15 minutes. If you have an MSDN premium subscription or you go to dev.office.com and sign up for a free trial of a developer site, you can go and create that Office 365 site and get running with it in no time. So enough about the tools. I think that it's about time for me to switch over and show you how to go and build an app. So this is Visual Studio 2012 with Ultimate Edition with the Office Developer Tools installed. When you go into the new project dialog, you'll notice that the tools have changed things up a little bit. We've actually reorganized the project templates so that Office and SharePoint are together. With the new app model, there's actually a lot more crossover scenarios between Office and SharePoint, and so we decided that it made much more sense for folks to be working on them together. We have support for SharePoint 2013 and SharePoint 2010 solutions. We have support for VSTO add-ins for 2013 as well as 2010. And here's the apps node where you can go and create apps for Office or as well as apps for SharePoint. For this demo, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a simple SharePoint app that allows us to provide a task list to our organization. And we'll see how easy that is. So in my new project dialog, first thing it asks me is what's the name of my app, and we default it to what the project name is. The second one is actually the more interesting and the more important question that you want to answer, which is what SharePoint site do you want to go and debug your app against? Well, here you can see that I'm actually working against my Office 365 developer site, seanlibrary.sharepoint.com. If you wanted one of your own, you can go and click this sign up link, and we'll take you through the setup process in about 15 minutes. Then you have to make the choice of what kind of app for SharePoint you want to create. And you see these three models that I talked about earlier: auto-hosted, provider-hosted, SharePoint-hosted. So for this one, I want to have the most flexibility for it, and I can get away with doing client-side code and declarative artifacts. So I'm going to stick with SharePoint-hosted. I click Finish, and what we're going to do is we're going to go and create that project. And we're also going and talking to your SharePoint developer site at this time and learning a little bit about it so that we can pull that information down to provide a good development experience for you. So if you see these messages that come up that say communicating with SharePoint, we're just caching data about your SharePoint site to make things a little bit better for you. Now, the first thing that we pop up is an ASPX page. Now, if you were, heard my warning before, you're wondering, well, Sean said that there was no server code allowed, and the first thing he's showing me is a server page. The thing to know about, hey, is this guy for real? So the thing to know is that these ASPX pages are supported in SharePoint hosted mode, but the thing that you cannot do is you cannot write inline VB or code behind VB or C#. You can use the stock SharePoint controls that are available, and I'll show you one in a minute, but you cannot go and add your own SharePoint controls. So you have all the power and flexibility of HTML, JavaScript. You also have flexibility of using specific SharePoint controls, but you don't have the ability to go and add your own custom server code. The heart of this application, or the key part of it, was this app manifest that I had talked about earlier, which basically is how you tell SharePoint about the website that you are building. And so you can see that you have the title and the name, and it was very bizarre to me. It was like, why do we have the title and why do we have the name? The nice thing about our designers, we actually, if you hover over the items, it'll give you tooltips that tell you what's the difference. Like the title is the name of the application, but the name is actually used for the address and app artifacts. So this is something that you wouldn't want to have be a localized resource. And so if you hover over these things in the designers, we actually give you quite a bit of help and guidance on them. The key things in this manifest are the start page. And so that when you click on your tile in SharePoint, that's what's going to go and launch, is this page. The query string, we allow you to append certain tokens so that you can get information about the SharePoint site that launched this particular page. By default, we include this thing called standard tokens, but throughout the talk, I'll show you some of the other tokens that you can go and add for this information. Also, we allow you to go and change the hosting type from here. If you decided that at first that you wanted to create a SharePoint hosted app, and you got halfway down your coding, and you wanted to go and change to that cloud model where you have server code, you can go and do it from here. So now what I want to do with my task list is I actually want to go and create a SharePoint list. For those of you who did development using Visual Studio 2010, you know that adding lists was actually quite a complex and difficult journey. With the new Visual Studio 2012, and this applies for both solutions as well as for the new app model, we have a much better story for creating lists. So I can go and create my task list. And you'll see in the list of app artifacts that it's the first one. It's actually the one that's used the most commonly by developers. And what we allow you to do is create your own custom lists. And you can choose to create it with a customizable list template. And we provide you with 6 common ones that you can go and create from. We also allow you to create instances based on templates that are already up on SharePoint. And we provide you with a larger set of those. Because I want to go and customize this list, I'm going to go and use the customizable list template, click Tasks, and click Finish. So now I've gone and generated a list based on the task template, and I can actually go in and modify it. So say in my tasks I want to have a different schema for priority. Well, I can change the choices that are provided by SharePoint by clicking on the choice box and seeing this property window come up. I can actually go into the choice. I can go into the array, and I can actually go and add my own custom types. So some of the tasks are going to be really low priority, and let's just give them a priority of never. Simple customization of the list. You can go and do a lot more things if you want. So now that I've built that list, I want to actually go and surface some UI in my app for folks to go and work with it. One of the nice things about working with SharePoint lists is you get a lot of list API or list UI for free from SharePoint. And so with the new app model, there's only a little bit of wire up you need to go and do to display lists. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to right-click and insert a snippet that will actually allow me to show off the list. And right now we have a collection of 2 snippets. These are actually in the product. Hopefully over time we'll be making them more plentiful for you guys. But these are the ones that we definitely knew were key for getting started in development. So remember I was talking about some of the controls that you could use? The XSLT list view web part, which is elegantly named, is actually one of those standard controls that's available as part of SharePoint, and you can go and use them in your pages. We've done the work to figure out what are the ones that you can go and use, and so most of these are actually on the left on the toolbox if you wanted to go and use them. For here, the thing that I need to figure out is what the right list URL is for it to go and display the list in my SharePoint app. The nice thing is if I go to the designer, I can go to the list, and I can see the URL is right there for me. I can copy it and paste it. And now I have an app for SharePoint that will go and display that list and provide users with a rich interaction with it. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and debug it. And what it's doing is it's taking all of those artifacts that were in the SharePoint project, and it's putting them together into an app package, which is a zip file, an OPC package, and we'll go into that in a little bit in the future. And then what it's doing is it's connecting to Office 365, and it's actually sending that app package up to a developer site for folks to do development. One of the things to know is you can't do development against any old SharePoint site. You either need to do it based on one that is a developer site or one where you've gone and specifically added the dev feature to. Part of the reason is that we want to make sure that the apps that people are installing on SharePoint sites are being managed by the IT admins and going through either the corporate app catalog or through the Office store. There's a question? Yes. If you go and create your SharePoint site and you use the developer site template, you can go and develop against that. If you have a need to go and develop against another team site or that, then you can use some PowerShell to go and activate the dev feature on it. And then it will pop your SharePoint site into a mode where it says that this is not for production purposes. So now it's gone and launched my SharePoint site. And this is actually running on SharePoint.com. And I can go and add tasks. Oops. And so I can add my task, which is task 1. And you can see if I do the show more, I can actually see in my priority filter that I can go and set it to my priority never. So that shows you how to go and build a simple SharePoint app with Visual Studio. Now, it took a little bit of a time for that app package to first get up to SharePoint. And so we were looking at ways that we could actually make the development on it much more iterative and much more quick. And so I want to go and update my app to use some new fancy tag. Let's call it the H1 tag. And so while I'm in my debug session, what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete this code and change it to H1, hello TechEd. Just something simple to show an update. And what I'm going to do is hit save. If you notice at the bottom left, it's communicating with SharePoint. And what it's doing is it's actually updating that page live for me, so that when I hit Alt-Tab, I hit refresh, and I get the updated page. So no longer do I need to go through app deploy steps over and over again if I'm doing quick edits. We only require redeploys of the app if you're editing things that are in a designer in Visual Studio, things like app manifests or the client web parts or the app parts. If you're actually just changing code, for the most part, you can get away with just doing this simple save and refresh. So that'll save you a lot of time. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch back to slides. Oops. And talk about some of the app artifacts that we support in Visual Studio. We have the app manifest designer, which actually, I should switch back and show you some more of the app manifest. I did want to get through that. The other things that you can go and set in the app manifest are the permissions. So remember I was talking about if you needed to go and access things within the host web, that you can go and ask for permissions. Things like, say, you wanted access to a list that was stored in the host web, you can go and do that here. You can actually specify whether you have read, write, manage, full control. And you can even go and specify properties here that says the kinds of lists that you want to have access to. So if you want to have access to document libraries, you can do that. And when you go and install your app, then it will request those permissions from your users so that they can have trusted that app. The app that I just did didn't really have a request for many permissions because all of the contents that it was working against were hosted within the app web itself. You don't need permissions to go and work within your app web. It's only when you're talking to the SharePoint site that really hosts your app that you need that. The other thing you can do with the app manifest is you can specify the requirements you have. So if it was a cloud app, you can say whether you needed a SQL database or a website. You can say whether you need access to duet services, workflows. If you don't have these things available on your SharePoint site, then the app will not install. So you don't have to worry about the error cases when those aren't available. We also allow you to go and localize your app by adding supported locales here. If you're planning to submit your app to the Office Store, you must go and add the locales that you support. But for on-premises development, you don't want to go and add a supported locale unless you really want to localize it to all of the languages that your company supports. If it's language agnostic, it will install everywhere. If you start specifying languages, then it will only install on those sites that have that language support on them. Another key feature of the app manifest is it allows you to get access to the SharePoint web proxy. This is a great tool in that it allows you to, if you do cross-domain scripting, without having to deal with JSON-P. If you need to call off from your SharePoint app to a different web service, you can actually call through the SharePoint web proxy and get access to it. So this is a cool feature that's available for you guys. So that was the app manifest in more detail. Oops. We also talked about how you can go and create lists as part of the app experience, and we have a full designer over it that allows you to create custom list definitions and instances, and you can actually go and modify and create what the different views are in that as well. For those of you who've been working with content types, our designer also allows you access to that, and both of these are supported for both SharePoint Farm Solutions as well as the new app model. One of the key things that we have added support for in our new tools, and is a world better than what we had back in SharePoint 2010 and Visual Studio 2010 support, is our support for SharePoint workflows. With the new SharePoint, we actually have .NET Framework 4.5 support for workflows, and so you can and VB and C# expression support in this as well. And we've done a lot of work to make the end-to-end tooling experience for this come together. So we've really customized what shows up in the toolbox, so it's the task that we expect developers to use the most. We've gone and created more rich designers on those surfaces so that you can have better interaction with lists and sites and users. And so you can see a lot of the things that we've done there. We'll have templates that allow you to create the custom initiation forms or the association forms that help you kick off and associate your workflows. And if you're developing on-premise, we allow you to do workflow debugging. So you can actually step through the workflow as it's executing against your SharePoint server. We haven't quite figured out how to get that working for Office 365, but if you're doing on-premises development, you can definitely do that. Thank you. The team has worked really hard on that, so I definitely would like taking that back. Business connectivity services. A gentleman was asking me earlier if we have support in the new app model for it, and yes, we do. You can actually go and connect to an OData feed, throw it into our wizard, and we'll actually import it as an external content type. And it gets integrated into our standard experience for modifying content types, so you can go and choose what columns get added as part of your app, and then you can start using the BCS services from within the context of your app. So we do have a lot of support for that. This is more of an in-depth topic, so definitely go to dev.office.com if you want to get more information on these. We have two more app artifacts that I'd like to cover before I go back into the demo. And the first one was that client web part. This was the one that I was showing you at the beginning of the talk where you had the weather app, and then you wanted to surface that. Well, in Visual Studio, we provide you with a wizard that goes and generates all the XML you need to talk to SharePoint to go and expose that iframe. And then we go and generate the pages for you that you can go and customize to show your custom content. We also provide wizards for creating UI custom actions. These are the menu items or the ribbon commands that you want to go and expose. And again, our wizard will go and generate all of the XML that you need to go and work with. Although you may, for both the client web part and the UI custom actions, you can actually go and hand edit this XML yourself if you want to go and tweak and change some of the key properties. So now I'm going to go switch back into a demo of these app shapes. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up an evolution of this task app. Let's see. Oops. One of my colleagues took the basic task app and turned it into a more interesting solution. And so I'm going to just F5 it to give you guys an experience of it. But basically, you have the standard task list here, but it's been souped up with modern web technologies. So we're using jQuery, we're using MVVM, we're using Knockout to really provide a more modern and customized experience on it. I'll just make sure it's coming up. Yep. And so you'll get this app experience of it loading. And you can see that I have a simple task list, and so I can add task 1, I can add task 2, I can add task 3. The nice thing about it with modern, you can actually have fun with the UI and do a lot of new web technology type things with it. Now for this app, I want to do 2 customizations for it. The first one I want to do is I want to go and add a client web part that allows me to put on my dashboard how many tasks a particular user has remaining. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and do add new item. And you're going to see in this add new item dialog all the different artifacts that I was talking about before that we allow you to add to a SharePoint app. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add the client web part, and I'm going to call it quick task app part. We can either have it point to an existing page or to create a new page. And for this example, I'm going to go and create a new page. And I'm going to just write a little bit of code to go and make this work. And since seeing me typing is probably not the best thing for this talk, what I'm going to do is just going to drag and drop it in. So I'm going to add some Ajax, I'm going to add some jQuery, add the knockout to this page. And then I'm going to add a simple div tag that's going to host our dynamic content. Now I'm going to go and add some JavaScript. So I'm going to add a new JavaScript file. And for those of you who are web developers, this really should feel a lot like standard web development. So add the QuickTask.js. Did I? Oops. Didn't put that in scripts. And you'll see here what I have is something that basically goes and calls into the SharePoint list using it. We use a camel query to go and define how large the set that we get is. But I go and query the list by title, get the items, and then load them, and then do a simple count on them. So now I've done all the code that I need to. Yeah, I've done all the code that I need to do in order to go and display that client web part. Now, as I said before, things that require a designer or things that require a wizard require the app to go and be revved. So we're going to have a little bit of the app uninstall time and the app install. But this actually will go a lot faster now that SharePoint is warmed up on this app. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my host web. This is the SharePoint site that I installed the app to. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go edit this page to insert the app part. click on the Insert button up here, click up App Part, and I will see that my Quick Task App Part has appeared there. So I can click on it, click Add, and you'll see even in the preview view that my JavaScript is actually executing. So if you give it a second, it's going to show the iframe where it's calculating the tasks remaining. It's going to do that query and show that I have no tasks remaining because I didn't go and add any on that home page. So that was pretty simple to go and add an app part. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and add a menu item to show off how to go and create menu items. And the purpose of this task will be I want to go and flag documents that are in my host library for review. So what I'm going to do is right-click on the SharePoint app project, add new item, and choose the menu item custom action. And I'm going to give it a name, add task. Click add. And then it's going to ask me a series of questions. The first is, where do you want to expose the custom action? Do I want it to appear in the host web? This is the place, the host SharePoint site. Or do I want it to appear in the app web, the SharePoint site where the app has all of its artifacts? Because the documents that I'm working with are not part of my app, they're part of the host's web, I want to expose this menu item on the host web. I can hone it in to work on a specific list instance or a specific content type or specific file extensions. But for this demo, I want it to apply to all document libraries, so I'm just going to go with the list template. Then in the particular item that I want to associate with through, I would choose document library. Click Next. It'll allow you to customize the menu text. Call it Add Task. And then it's going to go and navigate to the default page. So now we pop you into the XML that we went and generated as part of the wizard. And for the most part, you can probably leave this alone if you want. The key things that you may want to fiddle with are the sequences. And that shows like the priority of the menu on the command on a particular menu. So I got rid of, it went from 10,000 down to 100 so that it'll appear at the top of my menu. And the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to customize the tokens that get passed to it. So when I click on that menu item, I want to get some more information about my SharePoint site. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add another token that gives me the item URL of the thing that I had just clicked on. Now I'm going to go and update my JavaScript for the default page so that I can go and handle that extra query parameter to go and add that item to my task list. So what I'm going to do is just add a quick JavaScript function. And what it's going to do is it's going to parse that URL for that SP item URL, split out the parameters, and then it's going to get the text for it, and then it's going to go and add that task for the logged in user. So now I'm going to go hit F5. Again, because I used a wizard to go and generate the stuff, it's going to go and do the uninstall step. Then it'll install the app and bring it up to SharePoint. Get some water. So the thing I'm hoping you're seeing as part of this, as part of these demos, is we've really tried to provide you guys with a guided experience on how to get these common things that are more SharePoint-y into your apps, and make it so that it really feels like standard web development. So now I'm going to go back to my home site. I'm going to go to the documents library, and I'm going to see the menu items. And if I click, I can see that I have add tasks added to my menu. If I click that, what it's going to do is it's going to invoke the default ASPX page, and it's actually going to have in the query string all of the data that I'd asked it to be passed. And you can see that it's added this task that I should go and review the SharePoint documents developing apps for demo.doc. So that shows how to create a menu item in a SharePoint app. All right, now I'm going to switch back to some slides. So now we're going to talk about the app package. So we were talking about how that was getting deployed up to SharePoint. Some of the things that you need to know or be interested to know is what is actually getting put up to SharePoint. Well, as part of our build process, we put in that app manifest.xml. And as part of our build process, we'll go and change some of the things in it so that it's updated to be a generic SharePoint site. It's not to be a debug app. The other things that we add to it are those client web parts and the UI custom actions. So those actually are contained within the SharePoint app as separate entities, as separate elements.xml. We also, for classic SharePoint developers, add the WSP. This contains all the declarative artifacts that you know from SharePoint solution development. Lists, modules, workflows, BCS, the whole gamut. We also have the ability to add to the app package web deploy assets. So if they were going off to an external website, we can put those in, and I'll talk more about that later. As well as SQL Azure scripts for if you have things that are being hosted in an external database. So the key things to know is that the client web parts and UI custom actions will get deployed to the host web. The lists and WSP contents will get deployed to the app web. And these other web assets, if you're in an auto-hosted model, will get deployed to Windows Azure websites. And so you can see the things that are part of SharePoint hosted apps, auto-hosted apps, and then in provider-hosted apps where they get deployed to. And we'll go into that a little bit and show you this a little bit more in depth. But first, I'm going to talk about cloud apps. So with cloud apps, reminding you that the slide that I had before are the things to the right of the line, where you have the auto-hosted model and the provider-hosted model, where you want to have a website that provides custom server code, either for serving up server pages or for handling SharePoint events. So within Visual Studio, we've provided you with 3 key ways to go and create cloud apps. The easiest and obvious one is to actually go and create it in the new app wizard. If you know that you're going to need server code, go and choose the auto-hosted or the provider-hosted model. However, as said before, if you get into a state with your SharePoint hosted app where you've run to the end of what you can do with client code, you can always go and add that remote event receiver. You can always go add an app install event, and we'll actually automatically convert your project into a cloud app and make it auto-hosted by default. And so we'll go and add that web project, and we'll go and add the right artifacts for it. The other thing, geared a little bit more to folks who are starting from a web development perspective, is a feature we affectionately call Appetize. Basically, it allows you to take any ASP.NET website, right-click on it, and choose Add App for SharePoint Project. At that point, we will add the app manifest. We will add some SharePoint artifacts so that we have the right references, so that you have access to jQuery, so that you have access to the Windows Identity Foundation, so that you have all the things you would need to do to make it an integrated SharePoint app. And then you can actually you can hit F5 on that, and it would be a SharePoint app with you'd be able to access it from SharePoint, but then over time you would want to go and build that integration. One of the challenges with cloud apps is thinking about how you have to communicate back with SharePoint. Because the code is no longer hosted on the SharePoint box, you have to think about the trust model and how that communication happens. So I'm not going to get into too much depth in this talk on all of the intricacies of how this trust model works, but I'm going to give you kind of an overview of what you need to know to get started with it, and then over time, you'll probably want to go to either an OAuth talk or visit dev.office.com to get more of that depth. But the idea is that we're using an open standard, OAuth, for our web communications. And basically, the SharePoint site and your web project have a shared trusted third-party provider. Actually, it's a Microsoft Windows Azure's access control services that mediates that trust. The way it does it is by having by developing a trust through a client ID and a client secret. So both SharePoint and ACS know the client ID, and the web project will know and ACS know the client secret. And when you put them all together, that is what allows that trust to be established. And at a high level, this is not a course in how OAuth exactly works. What happens when you go and visit that web page in SharePoint is it will redirect you to the web page that's hosted in IIS. And as part of that redirect, it's going to add something to the page request called a client context, and that is a context token. When the web project gets that context token, what it's going to do is it's going to contact ACS with it, say, I have the client secret, I have the context token, give me an access token to call back into SharePoint. ACS is going to give you that access token, and then your web project can use that as a way to authenticate back into SharePoint. Good news is that our tools actually generate all of the starter code for you to get started with this, and so you can the default F5 experience has this already built in for you. One of the things that you guys expect from Visual Studio is a great debugging experience. And so with the new app model, with everything being hosted in the cloud, it presented a series of challenges for us to make sure that you had all that great ability to do debugging in the way that you expect. So what we've done is we've set it up so that even though you're deploying to Office 365 and you're deploying those artifacts up to the cloud, all of the code artifacts, all of the things that you really would need to debug and have manual access to are actually running on the local machine. So when we're debugging, we're running the website on IIS Express on the local machine. If you have a SQL database as part of your app project, it's actually being hosted on local DB. And we'll update the connection string on that database depending on whether it's debugging or whether it's running to make that work. Client ID, client secret, is something you need to go to the seller dashboard in order to get that secret to trust between the web project and ACS. For debugging, we do the magic behind the scenes for you and do a temporary one. And you'll notice that we update the web.config with it every time you debug. So that's just a quick note. And our debugging, we support it across all the hosting models. Oops, I need to move this. So I talked about one of the ways that you would want to switch into being a cloud app was in order to handle events from SharePoint. And there's two key classes of events that require the web project to be there to handle those events. The first one is remote event receivers. For those of you who've done SharePoint solution development, this is just like event receivers, except instead they're implemented as SOAP calls that come back into the web project. The other concept is those of app events. So when your app is being installed, uninstalled, or upgraded, we want to give people an opportunity to write custom code to actually handle those events. So if you have special logic that you want to implement when your app is being upgraded, you can go and do that. Again, we wanted to make sure that with this code that you had a great debugging experience for it as well. And when you're developing against Office 365, you actually run into a bit of a problem in that your events are firing as a SOAP service up in Office 365, and they're trying to talk back to you, either whether you're running in a conference or whether you're in your corporation. There's usually a firewall between you. And so one of the things that you'll require for remote debugging, if you're using remote event receivers or app events, is Windows Azure Service Bus configuration. Good news is that most folks have an MSDN subscription that provides some basic level of service bus access, and the amount that you use while debugging is very minimal. So you should be able to go to your MSDN subscription, grab that key, and put that into your app. And that's only used for debugging purposes. We also have added a command that allows you to try out how your app is going to run in the real world. So instead of it running against local artifacts, it's going to host your app in Windows Azure websites. It's going to host your database in SQL Azure. It's going to have your workflows running in Workflow Manager. And that's that deploy command that you can find on the context menu for our projects. For provider hosted, you have to actually put up your website yourself. And so we don't know all the right configuration to do that. So that's why this deploy command is only available for SharePoint hosted and auto-hosted apps. The other key concept that we have in the life cycle of apps here is publish. For auto-hosted and SharePoint-hosted apps, there's actually nothing really for you guys to do on publish other than, so our wizard is actually pretty simple. It's just one page that tells you what we're doing and where we're publishing it to, and we'll pop up the page that points you at that app. For provider-hosted, you need to tell us the site that it's going to, the client ID, and the client secret. And so we go and ask you for all that information so that we can stuff it into the app package before you put it up to your corporate app catalog or to the Office store. So now I'm going to walk into a demo of the remote event receiver debugging. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up a different app, which is a contact list app. And inside of it, I already have a list. And you'll see that because it's a cloud app, I have my SharePoint app project here, and I actually have a separate web project. And this is really just an ASP.NET web forms project with a few simple things that have been added to it. You'll see the identity model, which is how we use, is for the OAuth connection back to SharePoint. The SharePoint client runtime for access to the client-side object model. Then just standard ASP.NET web pages and scripts. In this app, what I want to do is I want to do some complex processing when somebody adds a contact to it. You know, perhaps it's going to go look up some information about them on LinkedIn or some database, or it's, you know, there's all sorts of processing that you may want to do. You may want to kick off a background check or something like that. Who knows? But for the purposes of this demo, I'm going to keep it very simple. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to calculate the full name from the first name and the last name. And so what I want to do is I want to go and add a remote event receiver that's going to do that processing, because I don't want it to happen on the client side. I want it to happen on the server. So I'm going to call this remote event receiver item added. And I can pick from the kind of list item events or list events that I want to create. It knows that there's only one list in my app, so it's going to choose that by default, but it also provides me with access to the other lists that it could respond to events for. And then I get to choose which events I want to handle. The first set of events, item is being added, are actually giving you a chance while the item is being added to intervene. Now this SOAP call has about 60 or 90 seconds before it times out, so your processing needs to be quick. And I'm going to be doing some complex processing, so I'm going to handle it after the fact. So what I'm going to do is, whoops, I didn't mean to check that. I'm going to check an item was added and click Finish. And you'll see that we've generated some of the code in here. We've added this thing called Token Helper that actually allows you to go and connect to SharePoint and do the authentication. So remember that OAuth flow that I was talking about before? We've made that simple for you by default. What I'm going to do for this one is I'm going to actually write some code by inserting it. And this token helper is going to go get that client context to authenticate. Then I'm going to look for the item added event, make sure I have the client context. Then I'm going to go in and look up the first name and last name that was added as part of that app. And then I'm going to do a complex calculation, which is I'm going to format the string so they have last name and first name. And then I'm going to go and update the item in the list. Pretty simple. But without the service bus debugging, this was really, really hard for folks to go and debug through. But now we've created this very seamless experience for it. So what I'm going to do is save that, and I'm going to hit F5 to bring it up to SharePoint. So now when I'm doing my deploy, it's sending the SharePoint portion of this app up to SharePoint, just like I was doing in that previous model with the SharePoint hosted model. But at the same time, I'm also launching IIS Express on my local box that's hosting both the web pages that I'm serving up, as well as the SOAP service that SharePoint is going to go and call into. So now I'm getting asked if I want to trust the app to have access to my basic information about the site and the users of the site. Because I have this remote web app, it's going to start asking me these trust questions. So I say I trust it. And now you'll see that I have a page that's running on my local host. And so what I'm going to do is, so now I'm going to add my first name and my last name and go and add a contact. And this is the scariest part of my demo. And it worked. It's kind of funny. Sometimes it will take like 10 or 15 seconds, so I was really happy that it came so quickly. But what's really happening is I just clicked an item on my local host web page. It called through to SharePoint to go and add that item up to SharePoint. SharePoint recognized, hey, there's an item added, and it fired that SOAP service call. And instead of it calling to my local box, which it didn't know about, it connected to a service bus endpoint that Visual Studio had set up for you. And so now I actually have the rich debugging experience inside of Visual Studio that you expect. So I can actually go and step through this code, and I can see how it's working. And I can see the first name's getting set, the last name's getting set, standard Visual Studio debugging experience. I can hit F5. Then I can go and refresh, and I can see that my code has done it. But wait, I actually have a bug in my code. All that complex processing I didn't quite get right. Well, the good news is that I had IntelliTrace running while I was debugging. Oops. Did I? Oops, I forgot to break. So I had IntelliTrace running while I was debugging. So what this actually allows me to do is go back in time and look at the application state as I was debugging through it. And so I can look through each of these steps, and I can start inspecting these steps and see where the issue was. Well, I have my full name calculated here. I can go back. I can go back. I can see that was where this line was the one where it changed. And I pretty quickly can spot the mistake that I made, which is in the string format, I had them in a reversed order, and I forgot to put a space in them. So you can see how we've created this rich debugging experience that you can do against the cloud. And the nice thing is that all of these features that standard web development just get for free, now a lot of these things come for free for SharePoint as well. So you're going to see a lot more of these features now that SharePoint has more of a development off-box, is going to be a more parity experience. You're going to have to know less specific things about SharePoint in your development for these. All right, so that was my remote event receiver demo. Now I'm going to switch back to a few more slides. So now that we've talked about how to go and create apps, how to go and deploy them to Office 365, now I'm going to talk to you about good practices for setting up your development environment. So one of the things that we've been talking a lot about at this conference and previous conferences is asset lifecycle management, and one of the key topics in that is continuous integration. What continuous integration is it allows you to go and set up consistent, repeatable builds for your team, so that every time somebody checks in, you can get a read on the quality of your project. So you can have your project be in a known state at all times. It allows you to go and do interesting things that allow your teams to collaborate better. So for example, if you have a QA team that's going to be taking on particular builds, it allows you to go and add versioning so that they know to report bugs against particular versions, and so your developers can see what the changes are between those versions. We also, as part of our continuous integration, you want to support up consistent environments and consistent ways that things are being deployed to. So that even though developer A and developer B have different dev box setups, when they check in and they go through the check-in process, they know that it works in the real environment or the real test environment that they're operating against. It also allows for teams to create a good workbench of automated testing and automated deployment so that they can get that quick and instantaneous feedback. In the past, I've demoed this for SharePoint solutions and with team build on premises. And those options still work. In fact, we've updated them to work with SharePoint 2013 and solutions. But what's really nice is that now with the Team Foundation service, which, how many of you guys have heard of Team Foundation service? A few. Basically, think about it as TFS online, Team Foundation server hosted online in the cloud. You can actually go up to tfs.visualstudio.com, sign up for a trial it'll give you 5 accounts, and you can actually use that as your own TFS server to work against. The nice thing is it's got team build hosted up there as well, and so you can actually go and get started creating builds without having to go and set up the build controllers, the test agents. We've done all that for you. The new cloud app model, we actually have Office 365 developer sites for you, and so you can go and use those. Instead of having to go and stand up your own SharePoint sites for a lot of your testing. So we've made it a lot easier. But now, I think the best way to go at this is to go give you a demo of what it works, what it looks like. So I'm going to switch back to my demo machine. And I'm going to open up one final solution. Let's see. Oops. And what this solution is, it's an app that a few developers on my team and a few PMs built that was meant to be an internal swap meet or an internal marketplace for sharing of things. And the first thing I actually want to do, I realized that I needed to remove it from source control. Just a second. I had already uploaded this, and I forgot to actually delete it. Come on. Just give me a second. So what it's doing here is I'm going to, I'm just deleting this particular project, and then I'm just going to go and reset the demo. Shift open. So what I'm going to do here with this project is I'm actually going to go and write a simple unit test. Again, because this is web development, the unit tests can be done in a very similar manner. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go add new item, or sorry, go add a new project to the solution. And I'm going to go to the test menu, and I'm going to choose a unit test project. I also, for SharePoint apps, you can use coded UI tests. They're currently not supported in the Team Foundation service, but they're still super powerful when you're working with an on-prem TFS server. Unit tests are will work, though, in the Team Foundation service. So I'm going to call it my unit test project. Add it. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add a simple unit test. So as part of this application, what it does is it allows you to send an email to somebody that says, hey, I've gone and I want to go and purchase this item. And the point of this unit test is to make sure that there's some valid content on the CC line, make sure that part of the things is working. So what I'm going to do in this unit test is just add the usings and add some content to the to line and the CC line. Then I'm going to go and create the email message, and then I'm going to go and validate that those are equal. I just need to go fix my references. And now I can go and run a test. So I'm going to go run all my tests. And what that's doing is it's building my web project. And you'll see that my test failed pretty quickly. And it's telling me that the methods were not the values were not equal. So I'm going to go in and see if I can pinpoint the issue. Let's see, it must be in this email or compose. So I'm going to do a quick go to definition on it, and I'll see that, oh, somebody left some uncommented code in here. I'll probably just remove that and see if it fixes the test. That's a great way to know if it's actually working. So I'll do that. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to run the failed test, see if I've resolved just that issue. Which, if I had a lot of tests that were failing, then that would be a huge time saver. So now I know that I've got my app passing tests. I can go rerun all, and it'll validate that I've run all my tests. So now I know that I'm not going to go and cause a regression by checking in. And I also want to make sure that my colleagues are not creating regressions when they check in as well. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go set up the continuous integration for my team. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the Team Explorer, and I'm going to go into Builds. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go and create a new build definition in the Team Build Online. And what it's going to do is describe what things I want to have happen for this particular build. So I'm just going to give it the name swap meet. Then I'm going to specify what triggers. So if I wanted it to happen only manually, I would choose this one. Continuous integration is the one I want because I want every check-in to be built so that I get a continuous read on all of the quality. If you have a lot of check-ins going on, or if your check-in verification takes a long time, you may want to use rolling builds so you can batch them up and have a set of changes that get built at one time. Gated check-in will actually block the check-in if it doesn't pass all the tests. Or you can also use this as a capability for scheduling your nightly builds and kicking off your nightly test runs if you have some more extensive processes. So as I said, I'm going to go with continuous integration. For the source settings, I'm going to make sure that it has my TechEd demo folder in it. And for the build defaults, I'm going to choose the hosted build controller that's available on Team Build. For process, this is where the thing gets more unique for App for Office, App for SharePoint development. So we actually have a site hosted on Codeplex, and I'll show you a link to it in a moment, where we've published what we think are our best practices for doing the deployment of apps for Office and apps for SharePoint. I already have those checked into my build process. I already have them checked in here. This is the template that we can use. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to change that build process template. So instead of using that one, I'm going to use the one that we had hosted up on Codeplex. Call it the Office Tool App one, and just call it Swap Meet 2, just to make sure it's unique. And it's gone and updated the process parameters. And what I want my build to do is I want it to go and build with the default platform and configurations. I want it to go run all the tests. I want to specify a particular build format. But the key thing here that you need to go and set is the deployment script. And this is going to be the PowerShell that executes, that goes and takes the app that gets produced by your build and sends it to your Office 365 developer site. So what I'm going to do is choose that, and choose my deploy scripts, go into SharePoint app, and choose the SharePoint app deploy. Now, that app deploy script also needs to have the username and credentials for deploying to that particular SharePoint site. And so you'll see that we actually have that in a nicely hidden parameters file so that I don't have to go into it and show it on stage. But now that I have the swap meet build definition ready, any check-in I go and do to Team Build, or sorry, to TFS, is going to cause that build to happen. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and check my entire solution into TFS. Oh, shoot. All right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just quickly on the fly change to another app for SharePoint project. I wonder if I should have gone back. I didn't check in the delete, did I? All right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly modify my build process. So you're going to see how to debug these things live on stage. Process. I want to make sure that I actually have it build the right things. Oh, you know what? Shoot. All right, so now that I didn't check that in, now I can go back. Now I can go and add it. Oh, but did I mess up my build? I'm canceling this build. Just making sure that I have my triggers correctly set. All right. So now I should be able to go and do a check-in. My initial check-in with tests. And so you'll see that all those items are getting put up to the Team Foundation service, to tfs.visualstudio.com. And now I'm going to go back to my build page. And I can see that there's a build that has been triggered. So now I can go and watch this build happen. But it's going to take a few minutes, and so I might as well switch back to a slide. So as I said, getting started with Team Foundation Service is pretty easy. You can actually go tfsvisualstudio.com and sign up for an account. We also provide access to it with your MSDN subscriptions. You would definitely want to check out the scripts that we provided on the CodePlex site, Office SharePoint CI, continuous integration. Use these scripts to get your build process kicked off. Write tests and check in. It's easy to get your set of tests added when you start projects. It's harder when you go build up those assets when over time after you've already built your project. So now, let's see if we can switch back. Oh, actually, oops. So now you can actually see that the build has been kicked off, and it's building the project up in the cloud. And this may take a minute. So you can see it's going through the different builds of all the different targets. So this is going to take a minute. So I just wanted to ask, what was your favorite part about the new development stuff that I showed? Just one or two people. Debugging? Okay. Anything else? Sorry? Client-side code. Awesome. And then there's remote development, of course. That's awesome. All right, so now what it's done is it's finally gotten through the build step, and what it's doing is it's actually going and deploying the update packages. So now it's actually going and throwing the app package up to a SharePoint development site. It's connecting right now to the dev site that I was working on. And it had uninstalled a previous version that I had up there. Yeah. So I'm going to switch back to my last slide, and then we'll see if the demo has finished by the time I get through it, because I only have like a minute left. So in closing, you've seen the Visual Studio supports a lot of the new cloud app model. We've gone through and made sure all the key artifacts that we think that you guys are going to encounter in your common development have been covered. We've shown off the development against a local SharePoint server, remote server, as well as Office 365. You have access to all those different app artifacts, and we've also shown the continuous integration with the Team Foundation service. The URL that I want you guys to leave with is dev.office.com. This is the place where we're putting all of our best content and the best place to get started. You can find out how to get a developer site within about 10 minutes if you go click the big orange button that says create a dev site. All right, now I'm going to switch back to the demo, which has finally gotten through. So what I've done is it came up with two links that were in the summary. One was allowing me to do the trusted. So it's actually clicking it. I've gone and it allows me to go and trust the app. And once I've done that, then I can go and interact with it. And if I want, I can just go and launch the app. And so here you can see the internal swap meet application that my team members built for us. And one of them really likes unicorns. So there you have it. So thank you, everyone.